Haven, Ohio, October, 11 p.m. A gas station at the edge of town, fluorescent lights buzzing over empty pump islands. That kind of place Em stops unless they have to. She had to. At dollars in her purse. That was all. $8 and a headache and 2 miles left to walk home. She was almost at her car when she heard it. A crash, a shout, something, a low, effortful sound. The sound a large man made when his body stopped cooperating and he'd run out of ways to hide it. Turned. He was on the ground, leather vest, gray beard, one hand pressed flat to his chest. Everyone around her kept walking. What happened in the next 4 minutes would cost her everything she had and change everything she was.
She had $8 left in her purse, $8. A dead husband's reading glasses folded on the nightstand, and a son she hadn't spoken to in 4 years. That was the inventory of her life on the night everything changed. But that morning, before the gas station, before the man on the ground, before any of it, Dorothy Harmon woke up at 5:47 a.m. the way she always did, no alarm, just her body keeping its old schedule. 31 years of ICU shifts had set something in her like a clock that couldn't be unwound. She lay there for 43 seconds. That was her rule. 43 seconds of just existing. Before the list started, before the day made its demands. Before she had to be useful to anyone or anything. Walter used to tease her about it. "Dot, what are you doing?" "Just breathing," she'd say. "You can breathe standing up." Not the same, she'd tell him. Not the same at all. Walter had been gone 6 years. She still took the 43 seconds. The ceiling looked back at her. Same water stain in the corner shaped vaguely like the Florida Panhandle. Same hairline crack running from the light fixture toward the east wall that she kept meaning to call someone about. Same gray October light pressing at the glass. She got up. The floor was cold through her wool socks. October in Millhaven, Ohio did not ease you into itself. It arrived like a decision. One morning the air smelled like summer, and the next it smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves, and the particular cold that meant real winter was maybe 3 weeks away, and you should start thinking about your storm windows. She pulled her robe on, walked to the kitchen. The kitchen in the morning had a quality she'd stopped trying to name. Not peaceful exactly. More like the kind of quiet that knew it used to be something noisier. More cups on the counter. More chairs pulled out from the table. More someone calling from the other room asking where the orange juice was. She filled the kettle, set it on the burner, stood at the window above the sink and looked at the backyard. The maple tree had gone orange overnight, just decided, all at once, like it had been waiting all summer for a signal, and the signal finally came. She liked that tree. Walter planted it the year Caleb was born, 38 years ago now, and it was taller than the roofline, thick through the trunk, completely indifferent to anything that happened inside the house. It had its own work to do. It did it without complaint. She made her oatmeal, plain, a little brown sugar, same as she'd been making since before Caleb could hold a spoon. She sat at the table. The chair across from her was empty the way it was always empty. She looked at it for 1 second, then looked at her oatmeal. On the shelf by the back door, a ceramic dish for keys, a hook for her everyday cardigan and photographs. Walter on their wedding day, squinting into the sun, because nobody had warned him not to look straight at the photographer. He looked young and a little ridiculous and completely happy. Caleb at maybe 10 years old, arms thrown wide on Walter's shoulders, grinning at the sky like he owned it. No photographs of Caleb after 34. She didn't think about that in the mornings if she could help it. Mornings were for oatmeal and the tree and the 43 seconds. Mornings were for getting ready to be a person. She rinsed her bowl, put it in the rack, went to get the mail. 3 envelopes on the floor below the slot, a grocery circular, something from the church about the fall fundraiser, and a letter from First Ohio Savings Bank with the word important printed in red across the top. She'd spent 30 years learning to read urgency in a face, in a set of numbers on a monitor, in the specific quality of silence in a room that had been loud a moment before. She knew what urgent looked like on paper too. She sat down, opened it, read it twice. Her savings account, $847 and change, the one she'd had since before Caleb was born, the one she privately called the just-in-case account even though just-in-case had been right now for some time, had been flagged for automatic closure. Failure to maintain the minimum monthly activity requirement. She had 72 hours to deposit at least $200, or the account would be closed and the funds transferred minus applicable service fees. She put the letter on the table, looked at the maple tree through the window. Here was the thing about being 64. Retired early because your spine had opinions about 12-hour shifts that turned out to be non-negotiable opinions, and living alone in a house with a mortgage that was almost paid off but not yet. The math was always close. Never desperate. She wasn't desperate. She was careful. There was a difference, but always close. Her pension came on the 15th. Today was the 8th. The checking account had enough for the week's groceries and the electric bill and her blood pressure prescription. Not enough for $200 in the next 72 hours. She opened her purse, counted what was there, $8. 3 quarters, a dime and 2 pennies, $8.87. She set it on the table next to the bank letter and looked at both of them. Okay, she thought, because what else do you think? Because a kitchen in Millhaven, Ohio at 6:15 in the morning does not respond to falling apart. Because she had seen actual emergencies, the kind that came with alarms and crash carts and the sound of a family in a hallway, and this was a problem. Problems were workable. She just needed to find the angle. She would call the bank, she would explain. Extensions existed. Banks had processes. She put the $8 back in her purse, got dressed and went to work. The walk to the clinic took 12 minutes. She'd counted them the first time, the way she counted most things. Old habit, bone deep, the ICU equivalent of always knowing how long something took so you could make decisions inside that window. Millhaven in October smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves, and the memory of summer trying to make peace with its own ending. She liked this walk even on hard days. Something about being outside and moving, watching the neighborhood do what it did. Mrs. Aldridge putting her recycling out, the family on the corner loading kids into the minivan in that particular morning chaos that looked the same in every language, in every city, everywhere. The older men who gathered at the picnic table by the park no matter the temperature, coffee cups and crossed arms, like they'd made some kind of oath to that specific table. She'd worked in this neighborhood for 30 years. She knew most of these people, knew their histories in the ways that nurses knew things. Not just the medical facts, but the texture around the facts. The things they hadn't told their families. The things they'd told her at 3 a.m. when the dark made honesty easier. She also knew, in the way you knew things you didn't say out loud, that knowing everyone and being truly known were different things. And lately, she'd been living more in one of those categories than the other. Dr. Reginald Adisa was already in the clinic when she arrived. Young, mid-30s, Nigerian-American, brilliant in that particular way where he'd figured out at some point that being brilliant wasn't the whole job. He made eye contact when patients talked. He waited the actual full second before responding. In her experience, that was rarer than it should have been in medicine. Morning, Mrs. Harmon. Morning, what do I need to know? Mrs. Potowski cancelled again. He held up a finger, and someone left a casserole in the staff refrigerator. No note, I'll claim it, she said. I had a feeling you'd say that. He smiled. Lab results stack is on your desk. They're filed under M again. I filed them under M deliberately last week. They go under P. The patient's name starts with M. The last name starts with P, the first name, Mrs. Harmon. Fine, she said. Under P, he laughed. She hung up her coat. The morning moved the way good clinic mornings moved. Busy enough to keep her from thinking too hard about the bank letter, slow enough to let her do the work properly. She did 3 intake assessments. She reorganized the lab results stack. She answered the phone twice, once for an appointment and once for someone who had the wrong number but wanted to talk about their symptoms anyway, which she handled with more patience than she felt. And then, around 11:15, she opened a folder on her desk to verify a reference, and found tucked inside by some accident of the filing system a document that had no business being there. The patient name at the top read Kowalski Margaret, A date 9 years ago, October, the same month. Under status, dend late submission. She read the reason. A supplemental insurance form, required for continued treatment coverage, had arrived 48 hours after the filing deadline. The primary claim had been approved. The supplemental, which would have covered the additional chemotherapy course, had not. Read the diagnosis line, stage 3 breast cancer. Treatment plan pending supplemental approval. She sat with the folder for a moment. The way you sat with something that wasn't your story but felt somehow addressed to you anyway. She didn't know anyone named Kowalski. She was almost certain she didn't. She put the folder in the correct drawer, made a note on the tab, went back to work. She called the bank on her lunch break. Held for 11 minutes. The representative was apologetic in the rehearsed way, which Dot recognized and didn't hold against her. She'd used her own professional tone often enough to know it wasn't insincerity, just the shape of someone doing their job inside a system that didn't flex. The system, it turned out, did not flex. 72 hours was 72 hours. She thanked the woman, hung up, unwrapped the sandwich she'd made that morning. Same wax paper Walter had always used. She'd bought it in bulk after he died, and she was still working through it, which seemed like either efficient or pathetic depending on the day, and thought about the math again. Pension, 6 days away. Extra clinic shifts next Tuesday, the checking account buffer. Not a buffer this week. $200 was not an impossible number. It just required her to have it right now, which she didn't. She ate the sandwich. Because you ate the sandwich. Because maintaining your own systems was the first requirement for maintaining anything else. Because a nurse who didn't understand that had never worked a 12-hour overnight. She'd find a solution. She had until Saturday. Her afternoon shift ended at 4. She stopped at the grocery store. Moved through the aisles with the efficiency of someone who'd been feeding herself on a calculated budget long enough that deviation felt like a personal failure. She put the name brand cereal back, got the store brand, stood in front of the yogurt longer than was reasonable before deciding against it. She was in the soup aisle when she saw the flyer, taped to the end cap, slightly crooked. A photograph of people in work clothes painting a fence. Some of them wore black vests with a logo she couldn't quite read at this distance. Below the photograph, Stone's Promised Station, Volunteer Day. And then, serving Millhaven and surrounding counties for 9 years. She read it once, moved on, she had enough to carry. The evening was quiet in the particular way that had stopped feeling temporary. She heated soup, read, watched the news until it made her tired in the way that was different from sleepy. That specific exhaustion that came from absorbing what the world was doing without being able to do anything about it. Did the dishes. Tried Ruthie, her neighbor, her closest friend in Millhaven for 22 years, the woman who had seen her through Walter's funeral and the end of her ICU career and the long, slow solidification of the silence between her and Caleb. But Ruthie didn't pick up, which meant the Wednesday card game. She sat in Walter's chair, his specifically. The old recliner she'd threatened to donate 8 times and never moved, because some things developed a gravitational field that had nothing to do with their monetary value. His reading glasses on the side table, still folded exactly the way he always folded them, left temple over right, placed at a slight angle to the table edge. She picked them up, put them down. Caleb had wanted her to sell the house, move to Portland. That was what the argument had been about 4 years ago. Not one explosion, but one conversation that finally said the thing too many smaller conversations had been building toward. Mom, the house is too big for one person. It's the right size for me. It's full of Dad's stuff. It's full of our lives. That's different. I just think Caleb. This is not up for discussion. She hadn't meant it to sound like a door closing. She'd meant to say something softer. Something that acknowledged he was worried about her. That she knew love could arrive in the shape of suggestions about real estate. And that she wasn't dismissing the love. But she'd said what she'd said. He'd flown back to Portland 3 days later. The calls had gotten shorter. Then the calls had stopped. 4 years. She looked at his glasses. She could call Caleb. It was 9:17. He'd still be up. He was always up late. Same as Walter, same as her when the nights got long enough. She could pick up the phone and find his name and press the button that had been sitting there unchanged in her contacts for 4 years. She looked at the phone on the side table. Not tonight. She knew the difference between not yet and not ever. She was still in not yet. She was holding on to that distinction carefully, the way you held something small and important when your hands were already full. She went to bed. She left the house at 10:40. Just aspirin. The headache had started around 8 and she'd been giving it the opportunity to resolve itself, which it had declined to do. The pharmacy and the grocery store closed at 10. The one on Cedar closed at 9, which left the station on Elm and Route 9, 12 minutes away, and she had her coat and her keys, and this was a solvable problem. She drove with the radio off. The night was the kind of dark that made the gas station's fluorescent overheads look almost welcoming, yellow light pooling over the pump islands, buzzing with that particular frequency she'd never been able to ignore. She parked near the door, went inside, almost empty. The overhead lights made the aisles look clinical. A young man behind the counter, his name tag read Hector, maybe 24, with the specific misery of someone 3 hours deep into a shift that had 4 hours left, glanced up when the door opened, then back at his phone. She found the aspirin, generic, $4.99. She brought it to the counter, put a 5 on top. Hector started to ring it up. And that's when she heard the sound. Not loud, that was the first thing she noticed. Not a crash or a shout. Something quieter. Low and effortful, the sound a person made when their body was overriding their decision not to cause a scene. She turned toward the glass door. In the pool of one overhead light maybe 30 feet away near the pump island, a man. Big. Maybe 6'1", broad across the shoulders the way men who'd worked with their hands for decades sometimes were. That particular solidity that wasn't bulk so much as permanence. Gray beard, black leather vest over dark flannel, patches on the vest she couldn't read from here. A Harley-Davidson beside him, chrome catching the yellow light. He was bent forward, one hand on the motorcycle seat. As she watched, his knees buckled. He went down, not falling, not collapsing, but lowering, like his body was making one final effort at dignity before it stopped cooperating. He sat back against the pump island, his hand slid off the seat, his other hand pressed flat to his chest. He was not moving the way a person moved when they just needed to sit down. Hector looked up from the register. Looked at the window, looked back at her. "Those Iron Hearts guys come through here sometimes," he said. His voice was careful. "Ma'am, I'd leave it alone." She was already moving outside. The cold hit her, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The man was against the pump island, sitting, not lying down, which was something. His face was gray in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. She'd seen that color before. She knew exactly what it meant and what it didn't mean, and how much time the difference required. She crossed the lot, knelt down, 30 years of muscle memory moving her hands before her mind had finished its sentence. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck, found the pulse, fast, irregular, stuttering in a pattern she recognized. "Sir," she kept her voice level, "look at me." His eyes found hers, dark, older than the rest of him somehow. He was working to breathe in the way that meant breathing had recently become a project, instead of an automatic function. She knew this. She knew the color and the compression and the particular quality of sweat at the temples. She'd seen it enough times that her body already knew what to do, while her mind was still catching up. Cardiac event, she said to herself, to the situation, naming it the way you named things in the ICU so everyone worked from the same map. He tried to say something. It came out fractured. Meds, forgot. She was already standing, already walking back toward the door. Hector stood in the entrance, arms half raised, uncertain. "Do you have aspirin behind the counter?" "What, behind the counter? Yes or no?" "I don't think I already have some. I need water, bottled water." He stepped aside. She went past him to the refrigerator case. Grabbed the smallest bottle, brought it to the counter. Her aspirin was still sitting there. How much? He punched it in. $6.50. She had $8. She put it on the counter. Didn't wait for the change. Back outside, he hadn't moved, which was better than the alternative. She opened the aspirin. Her hands doing what her hands always did, steady, because steadiness was something she'd built deliberately over decades, and it held even now, and shook out 2 tablets. Knelt beside him. "I need you to chew these, not swallow, chew. Can you do that?" He looked at the tablets in her palm, then at her face. She watched him make a decision, a small one, something behind the pain and the fear, a choice to cooperate with whoever this woman was, who was kneeling beside him in a parking lot in the dark. He opened his mouth. She placed the tablets on his tongue. "Chew, keep your eyes on me," he chewed, slowly. She watched his face and kept her fingers at his wrist, tracking the pulse, still irregular, still too fast, but there. She opened the water, held the bottle to his lips. He took a small sip and swallowed. "Good," she said. "That's good." His hand came up and wrapped around her wrist. Not hard, but real. The grip of a large man using what he had left to hold onto something solid. His eyes were on her face. He said something. She leaned in. "Margaret," he started, or tried to start. The word came out shaped like a name, and then it came out shaped like a destination. His grip loosened. Not gone, she checked immediately, fingers to his neck, pulse still there, still working, but he was somewhere else. Eyes open but absent, the way eyes got when a person's full attention had relocated to some interior place that other people couldn't follow. She knew that place. She'd watched people go there, and she knew that sometimes they came back and sometimes they didn't, And the thing you could do, the only thing, sometimes, was keep your hands steady and keep talking. "You're not going anywhere tonight," she said, quiet. The same voice she'd used at 3 a.m. in the ICU when it was just her and the monitors and whatever a person had left to fight with. "Do you hear me? You stay with me. Help is coming." She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he'd come from or who he rode with or why he was alone at a gas station at 11 at night. She just kept her hand over his and talked. The sirens came from the south, 2 minutes, maybe less. Before them, a single motorcycle coming hard from the east, tires loud on the turn into the lot. A younger man jumping off before it fully stopped, 30s, brown hair, black vest with the same logo on the chest. He saw the man on the ground and ran. "Ray." He dropped to his knees on the other side, looked at Dot. His expression moved through several things in quick succession: shock, confusion, a flicker of something guarded before it was replaced by something rawer. "Did you? He's conscious. Pulse is present. I gave him aspirin about 3 minutes ago." She kept her voice factual. Calm, because calm was something you chose to be in the same way panic was, and right now only one of those choices helped. He mentioned medication. "He has nitro." The man was already moving toward the motorcycle's saddlebag. "Wait for the paramedics. Let them assess." "What's his cardiac history?" He looked at her like she'd come into focus for the first time. 2 years, maybe longer. "He doesn't," a short sound, not quite a laugh. "He doesn't talk about it." The ambulance pulled in. 2 paramedics moved the way good ones moved, fast without rushing, no wasted motion. They reached the patient in under 30 seconds. Dot stood up, stepped back, made room. Because that was the other thing 30 years taught you. When the right people arrived, you got out of their way. The female paramedic looked up at her. "You give him something?" 2 aspirin, regular strength, chewed not swallowed. Approximately 4 minutes ago. He was responsive but went absent about 90 seconds back, pulse maintained throughout. The paramedic wrote something, nodded once, "Good call," and went back to work. The younger man was standing near his motorcycle, arms crossed, watching the paramedics the way family members stood in hospital hallways. That particular helplessness, the specific agony of caring deeply about someone and not being the person positioned to fix them. Dot stood nearby, not close enough to intrude, just present. They loaded the man, Ray, onto the stretcher. Before they lifted it, he turned his head. His eyes found her. She didn't know how, in all the motion and the light and the organized chaos of emergency response, but they did. He looked at her from wherever he was, from that border country between here and somewhere else, and she held his gaze and didn't look away. The stretcher went up, the ambulance doors closed, the younger man exhaled, a long shaky sound, and scrubbed a hand through his hair. He looked at her. Most people would have kept walking. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Were you or are you?" "Both," she said. "It doesn't exactly leave." He was quiet for a beat, reassessing something. "Dex Pruitt," he said. "Dorothy Harmon. Dot." He reached into his vest, pulled out a business card, white, clean, a small logo she'd need better light to read properly. "He's going to want to thank you." He held it out. "He won't let this go, please." She took the card. Stone's Promise Station, Dex Pruitt, Outreach Coordinator. She'd seen that name somewhere. Couldn't place it right now. "I'll think about it," she said, which in her experience was the most honest thing a person could say in a parking lot at 11:15 at night, while still holding the change from their last $8. Dex looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to solve something. "Thank you," he said. "For real." He got on his motorcycle. The engine turned over, and then he was gone, following the direction the ambulance had taken. The lot was empty. Hector stood in the doorway of the store, watching her with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed something that didn't fit any category he had. She didn't have anything to say to him. She walked to her car, got in, sat. Her hands were on the steering wheel. Steady the way they always were. She was proud of that steadiness, and also, in moments like this, profoundly tired of needing it. She thought about the man's face, the way his eyes went somewhere else. She thought about the name he'd said. Margaret, just a name, could belong to anyone, sister, friend, anyone. But the way he'd said it, she knew that way. She'd heard it before. Late rooms, low light, people standing at the edge of something they couldn't see past. There was a particular shape that word got in a person's mouth when they were calling towards someone they couldn't reach. She started the engine, drove home, sat in her driveway in the dark for a moment looking at the house. The kitchen light she'd left on glowed yellow through the window. She always left a light on when she went out at night. Habit from before. From when coming home meant coming home to something. The maple tree was a dark shape against the slightly lighter sky. She went inside, hung her coat, checked the lock, stood at the kitchen table. The bank letter was still there. The same $200, the same 72 hours, the same arithmetic that didn't care that she'd just spent her last $8 on a stranger's crisis. She put the business card on the table next to the letter, looked at both. Then she walked to the shelf by the back door. Stood in front of the photographs, Walter in the sun, Caleb with his arms out. She picked up the one of Caleb. Looked at it for a long time, his mortarboard at graduation, tilted because he could never get hats straight. Walter's hand on his shoulder. All three of them laughing at something just outside the frame. She didn't remember what the joke had been. She set it back. Went to Walter's chair, sat down, looked at his reading glasses on the side table. She picked up her phone. Found Caleb's name. Looked at the number she hadn't dialed in 4 years. Put the phone face down on the table. Not tonight, she said, to the empty room. But she said it differently than she usually said it. Not like a door. More like a window, still closed but with the latch undone. She turned off the kitchen light. Left the lamp on by Walter's chair. Went to bed. Outside, the maple tree stood in the October dark, all the way orange, still doing its work. Still there. She slept badly and knew it before she was fully awake. Not the restless kind of bad sleep, the kind that left you feeling like you'd been somewhere and come back. This was the other kind. Surface sleep, the kind where your mind kept running its own agenda just below the level of actual rest, surfacing every hour or so to remind you that there were unresolved things. As if she needed reminding. At 5:47 she gave up, made oatmeal, stood at the window. The maple tree was still there, still orange, morning light catching the top branches first and working its way down. She watched it the way she sometimes watched the monitors in the ICU. Not for information exactly, just for the comfort of something continuing to do what it was supposed to do. She thought about the man Ray. She thought about the name he'd said in the dark. She thought about the business card on the kitchen table. And then, at 7:23, someone knocked on her door with the particular knock that meant it was Ruthie Becker, and this was not a casual visit. Ruth Ann Becker had been Dot's closest friend in Millhaven for 22 years. They'd met at a school fundraiser the year their kids were both in 4th grade, and had spent most of that evening making the same quiet observations about the same raffle prizes. And by the end had exchanged numbers and a kind of unspoken agreement that this was going to be a friendship whether either of them had planned it or not. Ruthie's knock was 3 quick, 2 slow. She'd called it her secret knock for 2 decades, despite the fact that everyone on the block knew it. Dot had never pointed this out. She opened the door. Ruthie stood on the porch in her good coat. Not her everyday coat. Her good coat, the charcoal wool one she saved for occasions that required a certain seriousness of presentation. She was holding 2 paper cups from the diner on Maple Street, which meant this conversation was going to take a while, and she wanted Dot to have coffee so she couldn't claim tiredness as an exit. Ruthie Dot. She held out a cup. "We need to talk. Good morning to you too. Good morning. We need to talk." Dot stepped aside. Ruthie came in. They sat at the kitchen table. Ruthie saw the bank letter immediately. It was right there. She hadn't moved it, and looked at it. Then at Dot. Then she opened her mouth. "Don't," Dot said. Ruthie closed it. This was one of the economies of a 22-year friendship. Certain words were shorthand for entire conversations. "Don't" meant, "I know what you're going to say. I know you mean well. This particular thing is mine to handle, and I need you to let me handle it." Ruthie had learned to hear it that way, mostly. At least about the things Dot had decided belonged to her. "I heard what happened last night," Ruthie said. "Already. Millhaven is 9,000 people, Dot. You were kneeling on the pavement outside the Elm Street station at 11 o'clock at night next to a man in a biker vest." "Yes, already Iron Hearts," Dot said. "Not Hell's Angels. Is that distinction meaningful to me? Probably not right now. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. He didn't. He was having a heart attack." Dot kept her voice even. "He didn't do anything. He was having a cardiac event and he needed help." Ruthie wrapped her hands around her cup. She had a look on her face that Dot recognized, the one that led with concern but had something older and more complicated running underneath it. She'd seen it before, that look. Not often. Usually only when the conversation was going somewhere Ruthie had spent years learning to avoid. "Ruthie," Dot said quietly, This is about Frank. He looked at her cup. I'm not saying you're wrong, Dot said. I'm saying I know what this is about. A long moment. Ruthie started again. I'm just saying you're 64 years old and you went and put yourself next to a stranger in the dark and Dot, what if he'd hurt me? She thought about it. Actually thought about it. He couldn't move. He was going grey and losing the fight to stay conscious, and his hand could barely hold onto the pump island. What was he going to do? I know it's not the point. Softer now, I know, Ruthie. The kitchen was quiet except for the refrigerator doing its low hum and a car going by on the street outside. Frank Becker had been 44 years old, a careful man, not reckless, not the type who tempted things. He'd been driving home on Route 9 on a Tuesday evening in October 1994 when a group of riders coming the opposite direction had one person lose control. The physics of the situation hadn't cared who was being careful. It never did. Frank hadn't come home. Ruthie had raised Kevin and Dana alone after that. Done it without the kind of public grieving that asked anything of other people. She'd simply continued, working, feeding children, attending school events, making the Wednesday card game, and somewhere inside all that continuation she had built, quietly and without announcement, a wall between herself and anything that reminded her of that night. Leather vests, engine sounds, the particular easy confidence of people on motorcycles who seemed to believe the road would always work in their favor. You're not wrong to feel what you feel, Dot said. I'm not saying that. But he needed help, and the only question that mattered in that parking lot was whether I was going to provide it or walk away. She paused. I've walked away from enough things, Ruthie. I didn't want to add that one to the list. Ruthie looked at her. Something in that last sentence had landed differently. She could see it. The slight shift in Ruthie's expression, the recognition that Dot wasn't just talking about a stranger at a gas station. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The business card, Ruthie said finally, nodding toward the table. I haven't decided anything. Your face has. My face, Dot said, is having its coffee. Ruthie almost smiled, almost. Just be careful, she said. Not as a warning. More like a wish. I'm always careful. You're thoughtful, that's different. Ruthie stood, picked up her cup. Call me later? I will, she left. Dot sat alone with the bank letter and the business card and the last of her coffee going cold. She waited until 9, picked up the business card, turned it over in her hands, put it down, picked it up again. You're 64 years old, she told herself. You are not a person who sits in her kitchen turning a business card over for 45 minutes. She texted the number. Because texting gave you more control over the shape of a conversation, gave you a moment to think before the other person's voice arrived and rearranged things. This is Dorothy Harmon. You gave me your card last night. She put the phone face down on the table, counted to 20. It rang, unknown number. She stared at it, picked up Mrs. Harmon Dex's voice, alert, like he'd been awake for hours, like he'd been waiting. Thank you for reaching out, I texted. Right, thank you for texting. How are you? Fine. How is he? Stable. They did an emergency angioplasty this morning. He's awake, he's asking about you. She let that settle. He doesn't know me. He knows what you did. A pause. He wants to meet you today if you're able. Millhaven Diner noon. He'll be discharged this afternoon. He's being discharged the same day as the procedure. He is. A slight pause. He's not an easy patient. He had a cardiac event less than 12 hours ago. Yes, he's aware of that too. He'd like to meet you at noon. She looked out the window, the maple tree in the October light. I'll be there, she said. Good. Something in Dex's voice that wasn't quite relief but was adjacent to it. We'll see you at noon. She put the phone down, sat with the decision she'd just made. Then she got up, got her coat, and walked to the clinic. Because she had a shift. Because the work didn't pause for personal complications. Because 30 years of showing up on schedule had made showing up on schedule the thing she did when everything else felt uncertain. She did 2 intake assessments. She reorganized the billing files. She answered 3 phone calls. And around 10:30, filing a stack of lab results that had been waiting since Tuesday, she opened the wrong drawer and found herself looking again at a folder she'd put back correctly the day before. Kowalski Margaret A. She stared at it. Then she pulled it out and read it properly this time, all of it. The initial diagnosis, October, 9 years ago, the same month. The treatment plan. The insurance correspondence, all 7 pages of it. The supplemental claim filed 48 hours past the deadline. The denial, the follow-up appeal, the secondary denial, the notes that got sparser as the months went on. Margaret Kowalski had died on a Tuesday in March, 8.5 years ago. She had been 54 years old. Dot sat in the back office with the folder in her lap, 54. 10 years younger than Dot was right now. Younger than Ruthie. Younger than most of the women in her Wednesday book club. 54, which was not old, which was the age where most people were still in the middle of everything. Work and grandchildren starting to arrive, and the particular freedoms that came when the heaviest responsibilities lightened a little. She put the file back, precisely where it belonged, closed the drawer, went to wash her hands at the sink down the hall, which she didn't need to do, but which gave her somewhere to put the feeling that needed somewhere to go. She thought about the man in the parking lot calling a name in the dark. She thought about 54. She dried her hands and went back to work. 11:55. She arrived at the diner 4 minutes early, because arriving early was a form of respect she'd practiced so long it had become involuntary. The parking lot had motorcycles in it. Not many, 7, maybe 8, lined up along the side of the building with a precision that surprised her. Not scattered the way she might have expected. Orderly. Like people who were accustomed to parking in formation, who understood that how you occupied a space said something about you. She sat in her car for a moment. "You are a 64-year-old retired nurse," she said to herself. "The most dangerous thing in that diner is the coffee." She got out. Inside was warm and smelled like bacon and the accumulated history of a restaurant that had been feeding Millhaven since before she moved here. Red vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee arriving in an endless parade whether you asked for it or not. A few booths had men in vests. They looked up when she came in, not threatening, more like attentive, like people who'd been told to expect her. Dex appeared from the back. He was wearing a regular jacket today. No vest, she noticed that. A deliberate choice, she thought. Dot, he dropped the Mrs. Harmon, which she appreciated. "He's here?" Corner booth, he always wants the corner, a beat. He also wanted to be standing when you walked in, which I talked him out of mostly. "Good," she said. "He shouldn't be standing." "That's what I said." He disagreed. "I won on a technicality." She followed him to the back of the diner. Ray Kowalski was in the corner booth. He looked, not good but present, which was an improvement on gray and going out. Better color, still tired in the way of a man whose body had recently been through something significant and hadn't fully forgiven him for it. He was in flannel again, no vest, and he had a coffee in front of him that he probably shouldn't have been drinking. He was already starting to stand when she reached the table. "Sit down," she said, not unkindly, just clearly he sat. Up close, he was in his early 60s, she confirmed. Deep lines around the eyes, the kind that came from squinting into weather or into problems, possibly both. His hands on the table were a working man's hands, scarred at the knuckles, a specific callus at the base of the right thumb that she'd seen before on men who spent their days with tools. The callus of regular contact with a wrench handle. Mechanic, she thought. "You're wondering if I'm actually fine," he said. "I'm wondering if you know what aspirin does biochemically during an acute cardiac event. It inhibits platelet aggregation, prevents further thrombosis." She looked at him. 30 years of having people explain my own condition to me," he said. I listened. "Then you know 4 more minutes and the outcome of last night was different." "Yes." He held her gaze. "Which is why you're sitting across from me right now instead of..." He didn't finish the sentence. "How are you feeling?" "Like a man who had a heart attack." "You did, I noticed. And you're drinking coffee. It's decaf, is it?" He looked at the cup, back at her. It might be regular. She sat back. Something in the exchange had loosened whatever formality the situation had arrived with, and she could feel it. That shift that happened sometimes when two people figured out they could be direct with each other without it becoming a problem. "Ray," she said. "Dot, you wanted to meet me, I did." He wrapped his hands around the cup, looked at them. Then looked up. "I wanted to say thank you in a way that wasn't a voicemail. You could have sent a card." I could have. The corner of his mouth moved. "I wasn't raised that way. My mother. Polish immigrant, Gary, Indiana. She believed in looking people in the eye when something mattered." He paused. "She also believed in very strong coffee, which might explain some of my current medical situation." Dex materialized at the edge of the table, refilled Ray's cup without being asked. "Dex," Ray said, observing. "Go observe something else." "The decaf is in the pot with the orange handle," Dex said. "That is the regular pot. Just so everyone is working from accurate information." He walked away. Ray looked at his cup. He does that, he said. I noticed. He's done it for 6 years. You'd think I'd be used to it. You'd think. Dex brought her tea without being asked, which she appreciated, and then retreated to a booth 3 down where he sat with his phone and proceeded to very obviously not listen to their conversation. Ray reached into his jacket. He placed a photograph on the table between them. A woman. Dark hair, wide smile. The kind that reached all the way up, that involved the whole face, that couldn't be performed. She was standing in a backyard in late summer, flowers somewhere behind her, afternoon light doing what afternoon light did in photographs taken in the good years. Her arm was around a younger version of the man across the table. Ray with less gray, same eyes, she was beautiful. Past tense, Dot already knew, but the photograph held it in present tense the way good photographs did. Margaret, Dot said. He looked at her sharply. I found a file, she said carefully, at the clinic where I work. It was misfiled. I put it back in the correct place. She paused. I read it first. I want to be honest about that. He was very still. The insurance correspondence, she continued. The supplemental claim. 48 hours, he said. Not like he was informing her. Like he was confirming a number he'd said to himself many times before. Yes, I filed it. I thought I had the date right. I had it wrong by 2 days. He looked at the photograph. By the time I got the appeal sorted and found another funding source, the window for that treatment phase had closed. The cancer had moved. She died in March 14th. He picked the photograph up, looked at it for a moment, placed it back in his jacket pocket. She was 54. We'd been married 26 years. Dot didn't say she was sorry. Not because she wasn't. She was, genuinely, but because she'd sat with enough grieving people to know that I'm sorry was often just something you said to fill the space, and this man didn't need the space filled. He needed it held, so she held it. After a moment he said, Stone's promise came after. I needed to do something with the anger. There was a lot of it. He looked at his hands, at the insurance company, at the system, at myself, mostly. I'd done everything right, I thought, and then I made one mistake at the worst possible moment and he stopped. You can't live inside that kind of anger. It'll take everything. So I turned it into something else, the foundation. Started with 3 of us and a spreadsheet in my garage. He looked somewhere past her for a moment. Now we have a team of 12 and we operate in 4 counties. Last year we helped over 400 families navigate insurance claims alone. Just the paperwork. Just the forms and the deadlines and the systems that don't care what you're going through. Because you know what that costs, she said. 48 hours, he said it simply. I know exactly what it costs. She looked at him. This man who had taken the worst thing that happened to him and turned it into a reason to get up every morning and fight for strangers. There was something almost punishing about the scale of it. 400 families a year was not a hobby, was not a way of processing grief, was a full and consuming life built on top of a wound that had never entirely closed. The foundation, she said. The volunteer flyer I saw at the grocery store. The truck I've probably driven past. It's been here the whole time. 9 years and I never, she stopped. Most people don't notice until they need it, he said. Not accusatory. Just true. That's how it works. You don't see the net until you're falling. She thought about that, about how many things she'd walked past in this town, in this life, that she hadn't needed to notice yet. Why did you want to meet me, she said. The real reason, not the thank you. He looked at her steadily. The kind of look that was a compliment. She'd learned. It meant a person had decided you could handle a straight answer. Because Dex told me you wouldn't take money, he said, that you said you didn't do it for money. I didn't. I know. He also told me about the bank letter on your table. She felt a flash of something, not quite irritation, more like the mild indignation of someone who'd left their private correspondence where a young man with good eyesight could see it. He notices things, Ray said. It's intrusive and also frequently useful. What about the bank letter? I'd like to offer you something. Not charity. He said the word carefully, with the awareness that it mattered how you said it. Work. We've been trying to fill a position for 8 months and we haven't found the right person. What kind of position? Outreach coordinator, finding people, the ones who don't know we exist yet. The ones who are managing their own private version of Close to the Edge and haven't reached out because they don't know who to reach out to, or because asking for help feels like a defeat, or because they've tried before and the system told them no and they stopped trying. He paused. Finding them before they fall far enough that recovery gets harder. I'm 64, I know. I retired because my back, the job is not physical. It's relational. He held her gaze. You walked across a gas station parking lot at 11 at night towards something everyone around you was walking away from. You didn't calculate. You didn't negotiate with yourself. You just saw a person who needed help and you moved. He paused. That's not a skill I can train into someone. Either it's there or it isn't. She looked at her tea. She thought about the folder in the filing cabinet, about a supplemental claim and 48 hours, about 54 years old and a treatment window that closed. I'd need to think about it, she said. Of course, he didn't push. She noticed that, the absence of pressure, the willingness to let the answer be what it was going to be. There's no deadline, there's always a deadline, he almost smiled. Fair point, take a few days. Dex appeared at the table, looked at their cups, looked at Ray. You've been sitting for 40 minutes, he said. I'm aware, the doctor said. Dex. I'm just noting the time. You're not a clock. I have a watch which is close. He looked at Dot. He has a follow-up at 3. I want to make sure he actually goes. I'll go, Ray said. You said that about the last one. I went to the last one. You went to the parking lot of the last one, and then decided you felt fine and came back. Ray looked at Dot. He's not wrong about the parking lot. Go to your appointment, she said. He looked at her with an expression that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being told what to do by people he'd known for less than an hour, and also that he didn't entirely mind it. I'll go, he said. She gathered her coat, stood, Dot. He said her name the way her name was used when someone wanted to make sure the next thing they said actually landed. What you did last night, the aspirin, the water, staying with me. He paused. Margaret used to say that the most important thing a person could do was show up for someone when showing up cost them something. Another pause. You showed up, she buttoned her coat. I'll call you about the position, she said. Take your time. She walked out of Millhaven Diner into the October afternoon, 7 motorcycles in the parking lot, chrome in the pale sun. She walked to her car and got in and sat for a moment. She'd gone in planning to say thank you and leave. She hadn't planned on any of the rest of it. She started the engine and drove home. The evening was its own kind of complicated. She made dinner, ate it, did the dishes, sat with the accounting of the day, the diner, the conversation, the photograph of Margaret, the position he'd described, and tried to think about it practically, the way she thought about most things that needed deciding. But the evening had other ideas. Because around 7:30 she found herself at the kitchen table with the old photo box open in front of her. She didn't remember deciding to get it out. It was just there, brown cardboard lid that didn't quite fit anymore, the accumulated archaeology of a life in photographs and ticket stubs and the small paper evidence of things that had seemed worth keeping. She went through them slowly. Walter on their wedding day. Walter at Caleb's first birthday with frosting on his chin and absolutely no dignity and the widest smile she'd ever seen on a human face. Caleb at 6, at 10, at 16 in that year he'd decided he was going to be a person who wore hats and then quietly abandoned the project by 17. Caleb's college graduation, she and Walter on either side of him, mortarboard tilted, all three of them laughing at something just outside the frame. She couldn't remember the joke. She turned the graduation photo over. Caleb's handwriting on the back. He'd gone through every photograph box when he was 16, labeled them all on the back with dates and names, as if he'd been worried the stories would get lost. What kind of teenager did that? Her kind. That was the thing. He was so exactly her kind of person. The same compulsive need to have things in order, the same stubbornness that presented itself as principle, the same absolute conviction that if you could just explain your position clearly enough, the other person would come around. Neither of them had come around. She put the photograph back. Because here was what Ray had said, rolling around in her head with increasing force. Margaret used to say that the most important thing a person could do was show up for someone when showing up cost them something. She'd shown up for a stranger at 11 o'clock at night with $8 in her purse. She had not called her own son in 4 years. She didn't know what to do with that. She knew it. She could see the shape of it clearly, the way you could see the shape of something you'd been not looking at for long enough that it had gotten very large. But seeing it and knowing what to do about it were different categories of problem, and tonight she was only ready for seeing it. She closed the box, put it back on the shelf. She was sitting at the table in the specific silence of a house that had contained the same unresolved things for long enough that the silence had taken on texture, when someone knocked at the door. 2 knocks even, patient, not Ruthie. Ruthie was 3 quick and 2 slow. She opened the door. Dex stood on her porch. He was in his regular jacket, no vest, and he was holding a brown paper bag with the logo of the bakery on 3rd Street on the side. "I brought scones," he said. "Why?" "Because Ray asked me to check on you and scones seemed like Ray sent you," Ray suggested. "I made the scone decision independently. They have the cranberry ones." He held the bag out. "I noticed you ordered tea earlier. Tea people are usually scone people. I had a theory." She looked at him. "You can come in," she said, "or we can sit on the porch. Porch might be nice." They sat on the front porch, cold enough to need coats, not cold enough to be punishing. The street was doing its evening thing. A few lights on at the neighbors, a car going by, the particular quiet of a residential block settling into its night. Dex unwrapped a scone, looked at the maple tree in the backyard, visible through the side of the house. "Nice tree," he said. "Walter planted it, 38 years ago. Walter was your husband?" 6 years gone, he nodded. Not the reflexive "I'm sorry" that most people said, which she appreciated. Just the acknowledgement. "My father died when I was 12, he said. Matter of fact, not for sympathy, just placing a fact. Car accident. My mother raised 3 of us alone after that. She was." He shook his head slightly. "She worked 2 jobs and still made dinner and still checked our homework and never once made us feel like we were the reason things were hard. She must have been something, she was." He looked at his hands. "I didn't understand how until I tried to hold down one job while everything else was coming apart." She thought about the park bench, 4 blocks from here, 6 years ago. "What happened?" she said. "After you came home?" He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't reluctance, more like he was choosing which version of the truth to tell, deciding to tell the whole one. "What happens to a lot of people," he said. "I came back and the thing I'd been trained to be wasn't applicable anymore. And I didn't know who I was outside of it. And the systems that were supposed to help with that were overwhelmed and underfunded, and I fell through the gaps." A pause, and then I fell further. The park. The park, he looked at the street. Ray drove past that park every morning on his way to the shop. One morning he stopped. He sat down on the bench next to me and handed me a coffee and asked me my name. Just that. Not where was I from, not what happened, not how did I end up here. Just, what's your name? He paused. "You know what that does to a person? When they've been invisible long enough, someone just stopping. Asking your name, like it matters." She thought about a hand gripping her wrist in the dark, the specific weight of it. "Yes," she said. "Actually, I think I do." He looked at her. Something recognizing something. "He's not easy," Dex said after a moment. "Ray. He's generous with everyone except at himself. He spent 9 years building something for other people, and in the process forgot that he was also a person who was allowed to need things." He stopped. The procedure, he mentioned something, he didn't mention enough. Dex looked at the railing. 8 months ago, his cardiologist told him he needed a valve repair. Not optional, necessary, he declined to schedule it. She absorbed that. Did anyone? Everyone tried. Me, the cardiologist, his sister in Cleveland. A pause. Ray is, when he decides something about himself, he becomes a person who has decided something, and there's very little purchase on that surface. He's been the one other people lean on for so long, she said, that he doesn't know how to be the person who needs something. Dex went very still. "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." The street settled further into its night. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A light came on across the way. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. He turned to look at her directly. "Because you're the first person who's made him sit in a booth for more than 20 minutes, without him manufacturing a reason to leave. And because he asked me to check on you, which he's never asked me to do for anyone." He paused. "And because you talked to him like he was just a person, not the founder, not the mission, not the man who built the thing. Just a person." Another pause. "I thought you should know that that's not nothing." She looked at the bag of scones on the railing. "I don't know what you want me to do with that information." "Neither do I," he said honestly. "I just thought you should have it." He stood, picked up the bag, set it on the railing beside her. 2 more in there, cranberry, for tomorrow morning. "You didn't have to, I know." A small shrug. "That's the point, isn't it?" He went down the porch steps. At the bottom he paused without turning around. He was calling for her, Dex said quietly. When he went out at the gas station. "Margaret, he does that sometimes." He stopped. When things are bad enough, he talks to her. Like she's still there. He didn't wait for a response. He walked to his motorcycle, She heard the engine, then the sound of it fading down the street. Then the street was quiet again. She sat on the porch alone with the cold and the bakery bag and the specific weight of everything the evening had deposited in her lap. She thought about a man talking to someone who wasn't there anymore. She thought about Walter's reading glasses on the nightstand, folded exactly the way he always folded them. Still there after 6 years, because she hadn't been able to bring herself to put them somewhere else. Because putting them somewhere else felt like agreeing to something she wasn't ready to agree to. She was 64 years old. She thought she understood something about talking to people who weren't there. She picked up the bakery bag, went inside, hung up her coat, made tea, did not drink it, stood at the kitchen window with the mug warming her hands and looked out at the street, which was dark now and still. Then far away, from the east she thought, though sound was hard to place at night, she heard it. An engine, low and steady. Then over the next 30 seconds more, she stood at the window and listened to the sound grow. She couldn't see anything. The source was blocks away, the street in front of her house quiet and unchanged. But the sound kept building, kept layering on itself, until it was less like individual engines and more like weather. Like something moving toward Millhaven the way weather moved. She stood very still, and she listened, and she did not look away. She counted them. Because of course she did. 97 motorcycles. She counted twice, moved to the bedroom window, counted again from a different angle, came back to the kitchen. 97. Lined up along Birch Street in both directions from the corner of Elm. Chrome catching the early light at 6:43 in the morning. Engines off, every single one of them off. That was what she noticed first. Not the sheer number, not the vests, not the people standing beside the bikes with their hands in their pockets and their breath making small clouds in the October air. The silence, 97 motorcycles and not one of them running. Just present, the way a statement was present, requiring no elaboration. She stood at the kitchen window in her robe and her wool socks and looked at all of it for a long moment. Then she put the kettle on. Because whatever was about to happen was going to happen whether she'd had her tea or not, and she preferred to meet significant events with something warm in her hands. She was on her second sip when the neighborhood started waking up. Windows lit one by one down the block, the way they lit when something outside made the inside feel suddenly uncertain. Then faces, she could see them from her position, the pale shapes of people behind glass, trying to understand what they were looking at. Then Mrs. Koning from directly across the street opened her front door 3 inches, looked through the gap for approximately 4 seconds, and closed it again. Dot heard the deadbolt from where she stood. Then Mr. Aldridge from number 12 came out in his robe, coffee mug in hand, stood on his porch, and looked at the motorcycles, and then at Dot's house, in a way that made his opinion of the connection between these two things very clear. And then Ruthie. Ruthie came out in the good coat again, both days in a row, which meant the situation had escalated past the threshold that the everyday coat could handle. She had her phone in her hand and her reading glasses on, and she was already moving her thumb across the screen. Ruthie, Dot called from the porch, pulling her robe tighter against the cold. Ruthie looked up. Don't, Dot, there are almost 100. I know. Don't. I have my phone, I can see that. My thumb is literally, Ruthie please, a pause. The kind that contained 22 years of history and also a significant and roughly equal amount of stubbornness from both sides. Ruthie lowered the phone 1 inch. Maybe an inch and a half. It was enough for now. The young mother from number 8, the one with the extraordinary container garden, the 2 kids under 5, the minivan she loaded with the efficiency of someone who had made peace with chaos, opened her curtain just far enough to see, then let it fall closed. The 2 little faces that appeared briefly at the glass were there and gone like fish in a tank. Pastor Elwood Briggs came out of the corner house. 71 years old, flannel shirt, work boots that had seen actual work. He'd been the pastor at Millhaven Community Church for 38 years, and he moved through the world with the particular quality of a man who had sat beside enough people in enough hard moments that very few things genuinely unsteadied him anymore. He walked down his front path past the gate and into the street. Then Ray came from the far end, walking, slowly, carefully, Dex 2 steps behind him with the expression of a man who had suggested the car or possibly the wheelchair at least 4 times and been declined each time. Ray was in his flannel shirt with the Iron Hearts vest over it. moving with the care of a man whose body was still in active negotiation with what it had been through 40 hours ago, but moving. Upright, present. He stopped in the middle of Birch Street. He looked around at the neighbors on their porches and at the curtains and at Mr. Aldridge with his coffee and at Ruthie with her phone. He looked at all of it without performing anything. No spread arms, no raised voice, no speech-making posture. Just looking. Taking each person in individually, the way he'd looked at her across the table at the diner. Then he said, in a voice that was not raised but carried anyway in the cold morning air, "I know what you see." Nobody said anything. "I know exactly what you see. I've been on the other side of that look my whole life. I understand it." A car went by on Elm, the sound of it faded. "My name is Ray Kowalski. I run a machine shop on Henderson Road. I've lived in this county for 34 years. He paused. 3 nights ago, a woman on this street used her last $8 to keep me alive. I'm here because that's not the kind of thing you respond to with a card. Mr. Aldridge lowered his coffee mug slightly. "I'm not here to frighten anyone," Ray said. "I'm here because that woman deserves to have people show up for her the way she showed up for me. That's it. That's the whole reason." He stopped. And then Pastor Elwood Briggs walked toward him. He crossed the street slowly, hands visible, in the manner of a man who had learned that how you moved toward people mattered as much as what you said when you got there. He walked until he was standing directly in front of Ray. 2 men in their 60s, same general era, different roads to this particular morning. Briggs looked at the vest, at the Iron Hearts logo, then past Ray at the small white truck parked at the end of the motorcycle line, the one Dot had barely registered because she'd been too busy counting bikes. The truck had words on the side: Stone's Promise Station, Millhaven and surrounding counties. Briggs read it, then read it again. He went very still. "Stone's Promise," he said, "not a question, recognition." Ray looked at him. "The Henderson family," Briggs said. "Oak Street. After the storm took their roof 2 summers ago," he paused. "That was you, that was us, the Okafor boy." Briggs's voice had changed. Still steady, but with something underneath it now. Dialysis. 3 months of coverage after the insurance ran out. That was also us. Briggs turned to face the street, to face his neighborhood. All the curtains and the closed doors and the people on their porches trying to decide what this morning was. "Folks," he said, 1 word. 38 years of Sunday mornings behind it. Curtains moved. Doors opened a little wider. Mr. Aldridge set his mug on the porch railing. "Stone's Promise Foundation has been working in this county for 9 years, Briggs said. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. If you've needed them, you know their name. If you haven't, you're about to learn it." A woman's voice from somewhere in the gathered neighbors. Dot placed her as Mrs. Fuentes, 2 streets over, whose daughter had been in some kind of medical situation last spring. "They helped my sister in Dayton after her husband passed." Silence. An older man Dot didn't recognize from this angle. "My cousin up in Canton." February. "They fixed his furnace." And then Mr. Torres. Luis Torres from number 14, quiet man, kept the best tomato plants in the neighborhood, tended them with a seriousness that bordered on devotion. He stepped off his porch and walked into the street, and his face had an expression that Dot couldn't quite read from her position. Not anger, not relief. Something more complicated than both. 3 years ago, he said, his voice was level, controlled. "My wife needed surgery. The insurance company denied the pre-authorization. The appeal process was going to take 6 weeks. He stopped. She didn't have 6 weeks. The street was completely quiet. Someone called us. Said they'd seen the denial through a community health referral network. Said they had people who did nothing but fight those appeals, and if we wanted to give them authorization to work on it, they would." He looked at Ray. "The surgery happened in 4 days. My wife is at her sister's right now, in Columbus. Because she's well enough to travel." He stood in the street. "I never knew who to thank," he said. Ray nodded. "Once." The compressed, complete nod of a man receiving something he'd never expected to receive. And in the specific silence that followed, Dot watched something settle over Birch Street that had not been there 4 minutes ago. Ruthie was still holding her phone. Her arm had come down. But she was still holding it, standing at the edge of her porch with her good coat and her reading glasses, and an expression that had been moving through several things in quick succession. Suspicion, confusion, something more fragile underneath both. Dex walked toward her, slowly. No performance. Just a man crossing a street toward a woman who needed the approach to be careful. He stopped a few feet from her porch steps, Mrs. Becker, he said. She looked at him sharply. You know my name. Yes, ma'am. Dex Pruitt. A pause. I know about Frank. The air around Ruthie changed. Dot felt it from across the street. The specific stilling of a person who has just heard the name of their wound spoken out loud in a context they weren't prepared for. Route 9, Dex said quietly. October 1994. Ruthie said nothing. Her jaw was set. The group involved in that accident was investigated, Dex said. The rider who lost control was driving under the influence. That finding mattered to a lot of people in our community. It still does. He paused. We've spent years making sure our chapter and the ones we're connected to hold to a different standard. Not because it changes what happened, because it matters what you do after. Ruthie's grip on the phone tightened, then released slightly. We started a fund, Dex continued, after a few incidents in the early years. Accidents where families were left without support, without resources, without anyone showing up to help them figure out what came next. He looked at her steadily. The fund provides support to families affected by road accidents involving motorcycles, legal fees, lost income, long-term care costs. What does that have to do with? Frank Becker's name is on the founding acknowledgement of that fund, Dex said. Ruthie stopped. Not as a donor, as a person who deserved to be remembered. He held her gaze. Because names matter. Because the people who were taken too fast and too soon deserve to have someone say, they were here. They were real. We haven't forgotten. A pause. Frank has been on that list for 28 years. The phone slid fully to Ruthie's side. She stood on her porch for a long moment. Then she sat down on the top step. Not dramatically. Not the way people sat down in movies when their legs gave out. Just sat. Because standing required more than she had right now, and she knew it. Dex didn't move toward her. Didn't speak. Just stood at a respectful distance and waited, the way you waited for someone who needed a moment to be entirely theirs. The morning had moved on without drama from that point. The chill in the air was the kind that meant the coffee someone had started bringing out from the truck was going to be welcome. People came off porches. Voices talked to other voices. The frozen quality of the first 10 minutes thawed slowly into something else. Not celebration exactly, more like a neighborhood deciding collectively to be curious instead of afraid. Ray found Dot on her porch. He walked up the path and stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her. She was still in her robe. She'd stopped worrying about this approximately 20 minutes ago. He held out an envelope. She looked at it. Ray, before you say anything, I'm going to say something, I know. Before you do. He kept the envelope extended. The bank letter on your table, Dex mentioned it. The $200 is in there. The prescription too. The one I'm guessing is running low. He paused. The rest is for whatever you've been not buying because you've been not buying it. She looked at the envelope. Ray, I am not. There's a letter inside. She stopped. Read the letter first, he said, then argue with me. She took the envelope, opened it right there on the porch, in her robe, in the October morning, because she wasn't going to stand here with an unopened envelope while the street reorganized itself around her. The letter was on Stone's Promise Foundation letterhead. Clean, specific, professional. Community outreach coordinator. Full-time. The salary was real. The kind of real that would change the math she'd been doing in her head every month for the last 3 years. Full benefits. Health insurance. Start date 2 weeks from now. She read it twice. Your job, Ray said from the bottom of her steps, would be to find people. The ones who've fallen through the cracks or are about to. The ones who don't know we exist, or who've stopped asking for help because asking got them nowhere too many times. You'd visit families, review cases, be the person who shows up before the crisis, not after. I'm 64, she said. Yes, I retired because of a back injury. The position doesn't require anything physical. He looked at her steadily. It requires exactly what you did 3 nights ago. Seeing a person as a person and acting on what you see. I worked part-time at a clinic, that's not. You worked 2 mornings a week because you couldn't completely stop being useful. That's not retirement, Dot. That's just a reduced schedule. A pause. This is the full version. She looked down at the letter. Why me, she said. Not rhetorically. A real question that deserved a real answer. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that preceded honesty rather than filling the space where honesty should go. Because you used your last $8, he said. Not because you had them to spare. Because you had them and someone needed them, and that was the calculation. He paused. I've been trying to find someone for this position for 8 months. I've interviewed 12 people. Good people. Qualified people. People who understood the work and wanted to do it. He stopped. None of them would have done what you did. Because doing what you did requires something that isn't on any resume. She thought about the ICU. About 3 in the morning and the monitors and the families in hallways. About the thing that happened sometimes when a patient looked at you from the edge of somewhere terrible and you looked back. Not past them, not through them, at them. And that specific exchange meant something, held something, kept something tethered. There's also a car, Ray said. She looked at him. Your car makes a sound on left turns. Dex heard it when he was leaving last night. He was leaving away from my car. He has exceptional hearing. You mentioned it needed new brakes and a belt replacement. It's parked around the corner. We didn't want to assume you'd say yes. She stood with all of it, the envelope, the letter, the car around the corner, the 97 motorcycles on her street and the neighbors who had come down off their porches and were now standing in the morning cold, having actual conversations with actual strangers. The October light on everything. I haven't said yes, she said. I know, I also haven't said no. I know that too. She folded the letter, put it back in the envelope. The procedure, she said. The valve repair. The one recommended 8 months ago. Ray went very still. That's not Ray. She said his name the way she said names when she needed them to do their full job. Anchor a person to the present, to this conversation, to the thing that was being said. Have you scheduled it? He looked at the porch steps. A long pause. No, are you going to? Another pause. Longer. I'll think about it. That's not Dot. He looked up, and she saw it. The thing she'd glimpsed at the gas station, the thing behind his eyes that wasn't fear exactly. Something older and more deliberate than fear. The specific exhaustion of a person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had at some point made a private arrangement with that weight, had decided the carrying was the point, had stopped asking whether putting it down was allowed. She knew the shape of it, not from the outside looking in. From the inside I know, she said, quietly. Not the knowing of someone with a diagnosis or a recommendation. The knowing of someone who recognized the territory because she'd been living adjacent to it. My son, she said, Caleb, we haven't spoken in 4 years, because I was so certain I was right about one decision that I let being right become more important than him. She paused. I've been standing at the edge of calling him for 4 years, telling myself not yet, telling myself there's a right moment. She looked at Ray. There isn't a right moment. There's just this moment, and then the next one, and eventually you realize you've been choosing the absence so long it started to feel like a position instead of a failure. He was very still, Margaret, she said. His jaw tightened. She would want you here, Dot said. I never met her. I know her from a photograph and a filing cabinet and the way you said her name in the dark. But I don't think she sent you to a gas station at 11 at night to come home and keep deciding the procedure could wait. The street was alive around them now. Sounds of people and movement and something that was beginning to resemble a neighborhood rather than a collection of closed doors. The Stones' Promise truck had been opened. People were moving things. Dex was somewhere organizing something with his particular efficient energy. The kind that looked effortless because he'd stopped making it look like effort. Ray stood at the bottom of her porch steps. You're direct, he said. 30 years in the ICU. People don't have time for indirect. Is it always this uncomfortable? Usually more so, she considered. You're managing it well. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile and not quite not one. I'll call Fielding today, he said. The cardiologist. I'll schedule it. Good, I'm not. This isn't because you, Ray. What? It's between you and Margaret. She tucked the envelope under her arm. I'll read this tonight and call you tomorrow. Take whatever time you need. You need to sit down. You've been standing too long. I've been standing for 6 minutes. You had a cardiac procedure 2 days ago. He looked at the porch steps, looked at her, sat down on the bottom step with the careful movement of a man conceding a point without announcing he was conceding it. Better, she said. You're going to be an extremely difficult person to work with. I've been told. Who told you? Everyone I've ever worked with. He looked up at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. The one that meant he was deciding whether to be amused or resistant, and amused was winning. Call me tomorrow, he said. I will. She went inside to get dressed. Dr. Nora Fielding called on Thursday morning. Dot was at the clinic, midway through reorganizing the supply cabinet that had been bothering her for 6 weeks. Not her cabinet, not technically her responsibility, But it was bothering her, and reorganizing it would take 40 minutes, and the satisfaction would be entirely worth whatever Dr. Adisa said about it. Her cell rang, unknown number, she answered it. Mrs. Harmon, this is Dr. Nora Fielding. I treat Ray Kowalski at Millhaven Cardiology. Dot set down the box of gauze she was holding. He's fine. He's a brief pause that contained something. He called me yesterday afternoon. He's scheduled the valve repair for November 3rd. She leaned against the supply shelf. 8 months, Fielding said. I've been trying to get him to schedule that procedure for 8 months. His previous cardiologist tried for 2 months before that. She paused. He called me at 4:15 yesterday afternoon and asked if the 3rd was available. I'm glad. He asked me to call you. He said you'd want to know, and he said, a brief sound. He said to tell you he'd made the call and that you were not allowed to be smug about it. She pressed her lips together. He also asked me to tell you something else, Fielding continued. He wanted it to come from me because, and I'm quoting, she'll take it more seriously from a physician. He's not wrong. The night of the cardiac event, the window in which you administered the aspirin. Fielding's voice settled into the register of someone conveying information that mattered precisely, not dramatizing, not softening. He had 4 minutes. The aspirin prevented the thrombus from fully occluding the left anterior descending artery. Without that intervention, by the time the paramedics arrived, the cardiac tissue damage would have been irreversible. Yes, a pause. I want you to hear that clearly, not in the way people say it colloquially, in the literal, measurable, cardiac Timolinen way. You saved his life. Dot stood in the supply room with a box of gauze and said nothing for a moment. There's one more thing, Fielding said. When Ray declined the procedure 8 months ago, I asked him to explain his reasoning. He didn't give me one. He said it wasn't the right time and left. She paused. When he called yesterday to schedule, I asked again. He told me something. Dot waited. He said he'd been waiting for a reason that was bigger than the logistics. Those were his words, bigger than the logistics. Fielding was quiet for a moment. I've practiced cardiology for 22 years, Mrs. Harmon. I've had patients decline necessary procedures for all kinds of reasons. Fear of surgery, denial, financial concerns. But occasionally there's a different category. People who understand perfectly well what they need medically and choose not to pursue it because they've stopped being sure they want to be on the other side of it. She paused. I think Ray was in that category. And I think something changed. What did he say? Dot said. When he called, he said, there's someone I owe the courtesy of still being here. She looked at the supply shelf without seeing it. He didn't say your name, Fielding added. He didn't need to. Dot took a breath, slow, deliberate, the kind she'd used in the ICU when she needed to stay on the right side of her own composure. Thank you, she said, for calling. He said you'd say that too, Fielding said. He said to tell you that thanking me was unnecessary and that he'd see you when he got out. She almost laughed. He's going to be an extremely difficult patient, she said. Oh, I know, Fielding said. I've already spoken to the surgical team. She hung up, stood in the supply cabinet for another moment. Then she went back to reorganizing it, because it still needed reorganizing, and a person did not stop doing the work because the work had briefly made her feel like she'd been standing too close to something very large and very bright. Dr. Adisa found her 20 minutes later, cabinet fully reorganized, labels facing forward. He looked at it. Did you? It was bothering me. It's not your cabinet. It was still bothering me. He looked at her face, looked at the cabinet, decided something. There's coffee, he said. Come have some. She went and had some. Ruthie came over on Saturday, not the good coat. The everyday coat, which meant the emergency had been reclassified. She brought her own coffee and a tin of the almond cookies she made every October when the grocery store got the fall baking display out, and she felt what she always called her seasonal obligation to produce something with her hands. They sat at the kitchen table. The bank letter was gone. That problem had been solved, the account preserved, the math reworked. The table looked like itself again. Just a table the way it was supposed to. Ruthie opened the cookie tin. Set it between them. The tree is peaking, she said, looking toward the window. Another week and it'll start letting go. They always do it too fast. They do. A moment of quiet. The particular comfortable quiet of two women who didn't need to fill every silence. Ruthie wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Looked at it. Then looked up with the expression of someone who had spent the better part of the week getting to a thing they now needed to say. I called Kevin, she said. Kevin. Her son. Raleigh, North Carolina. She talked about him with the particular mix of love and distance that developed between parents and adult children who had been given no crisis to come together over and had therefore drifted to the comfortable width of phone calls every few weeks. I told him about the fund, Ruthie said. About Frank's name. Dot waited. He didn't know. Ruthie's voice was doing something careful, staying on the surface of itself, not because she was hiding anything but because she was holding something that was still a little fragile, and she didn't want to drop it by speaking too fast. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said it felt like his father was still. She stopped. Still doing something after 30 years, she said. Not to Dot exactly, more to the table or to herself. 30 years of pointing the anger at the vests, at the engines, because it's easier to hate a category than to hate the specific man who was drinking and got behind the handlebars and made a decision that killed my husband. She picked up the cookie again, put it back down. I couldn't stay that angry at one man, he's dead. Has been for 20 years, so the anger went somewhere else. It needed somewhere to go, Dot said. It went to the wrong place. Simply, no drama, just a woman in her 60s telling the truth about something she'd been carrying since her 40s. Frank would have hated it. He had no patience for that kind of thinking. He'd have said I was being. She stopped. Almost smiled. He'd have said I was being ridiculous. In exactly that voice he had, the impossibly reasonable one. You would have been furious at him for it. For about 4 days, and then I would have admitted he was right. She looked at the window. I always admitted it eventually. That's the thing about being married to someone reasonable when you're not always reasonable. You get a lot of practice at eventually. They sat with that. I'm going to volunteer, Ruthie said, at the foundation. They're looking for someone who can help with the community events, cooking, organizing, that sort of thing. She looked at the tin of cookies. I make 100 of these and don't think twice about it. You do. So, Ruthie ate a cookie. Dot your face, Ruthie said. My face is having a cookie. Your face is doing the thing where it knows something. My face is 64 years old and it minds its own business. Your face has never once minded its own business in 22 years. Dot looked at the window, the maple tree, the orange going slightly brighter as the morning light shifted. Caleb called, she said. Ruthie went completely still. Thursday evening, Dot continued. Portland area code. I almost didn't pick up because I didn't recognize the number. She paused. He saw something online. Someone posted a video of the motorcycles from our street, and my name was in the comments and he, Dot. We talked for 40 minutes. Ruthie's eyes went bright in that way she tried to keep under control and usually couldn't. About nothing mostly, Dot said. About his work, about a restaurant he'd been to, about the tree. She paused, about Walter. Oh, Dot, he's coming, she said. December he'll stay a few days. 4 years, I know. It's a beginning. She said it clearly and carefully, the way she said things she needed to be precise about. That's all it is. 1 phone call and a visit in December. We haven't solved anything. We haven't had the conversation we need to have. But we're going to be in the same room. She looked at her coffee. You can't have the conversation if you're not in the same room. No, Ruthie agreed. You can't. Walter would have made it much simpler. He'd have called Caleb without telling me and arranged it, and then announced it was happening, and I'd have been furious and relieved in equal measure. He would have, Ruthie said. Absolutely he would have. Impossibly reasonable. The worst kind of person to be in an argument with. The absolute worst. They smiled. The same smile more or less. The kind that came from knowing someone well enough to grieve the same person in the same key. I'm taking the job, Dot said. Ruthie looked at her. Ray's foundation, the outreach position. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. I called him yesterday morning. I told him yes. How do you feel? She thought about it. Like I've been standing at a window for a long time, she said, and someone finally opened the door. Ruthie reached across the table and put her hand over Dot's. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Outside, the maple tree stood in the October light, doing exactly what it had been doing for 38 years. 6 months later, on the first Saturday of April, Margaret House opened. The building on Clement Street had been empty for 3 years before Stone's Promise acquired it. A former community center that had been a polling location, and before that a dentist's office, and before that, apparently, a hardware store, though nobody currently alive seemed to have been in Millhaven long enough to confirm this. It had good bones, high ceilings, east-facing windows that filled the front rooms with morning light. It had taken 4 months of weekends and volunteer labor and the kind of organized chaos that Dex managed with the same focused energy he brought to everything. Ribbon cutting happened at 10 on a Saturday morning that had decided to be warm. Genuinely warm, mid-50s, sun out, the kind of April day that felt like a reward for having gotten through the winter. Dot stood with an oversized pair of scissors that she felt slightly ridiculous about, and Ray stood beside her, looking like a man who had been told to stand still and accept being honored and was finding the experience physically uncomfortable. "You could have warned me about the scissors," she said, not moving her lips much. "I thought they added gravitas." "They add 18 inches of unnecessary." What? Smile. She smiled. Someone took a photograph. Probably several people took photographs. Ray was looking slightly to the left of the camera, which she'd noticed was a thing he did in photographs. As if making full eye contact with a lens was a form of agreement he wasn't ready to give. The ribbon came down, inside. A job training center occupying what had been the back office suite. A food bank in the old storage rooms, 3 mornings a week, already with a waiting list of volunteers that Ruthie was managing with an organizational efficiency that had surprised everyone except Dot. An after-school program that had 47 kids enrolled for the fall, coordinated by a young woman named Priya who had come to Stone's Promise as a client 2 years ago and was now on staff. A medical clinic in the front rooms, volunteer physicians 2 mornings a week, free intake assessments, staffed in part by Dr. Adisa, who had agreed to give 1 morning a month before Dot had finished asking, and a room at the back of the building. Quiet, small, east-facing window, good light in the mornings, a desk. 2 chairs placed side by side rather than across from each other, because in her experience people talked more honestly when nobody was sitting behind a barrier. On the wall, a photograph in a simple frame, Margaret Kowalski, dark hair, wide smile that reached all the way up. Standing in a backyard in late summer, laughing at something just out of frame, arm around a younger version of the man who had given Dot the photograph on a Tuesday afternoon with the same matter-of-factness he brought to most things. She should be somewhere people can see her, Ray had said. This seemed right. Dot had put it on the wall that same afternoon. She'd stood in the empty room for a moment after, just her and the light and the photograph. "I didn't know you," she'd said, quietly to the woman in the frame. "But your husband says hello, and he's going to be okay. The surgery had gone well." Ray had been in the hospital for 4 days, exactly as long as he was supposed to be, not 1 day less, which Dot suspected had required active containment on Dex's part. He'd spent 3 weeks at his sister's house in Cleveland recovering, during which he had called Dot approximately every other day to ask questions about the Foundation's caseload that he was technically not supposed to be managing yet, and which she answered because refusing him information was slower than providing it, with the caveat that he was not to act on any of it until Dr. Fielding cleared him. He'd come back on a Monday morning at 7:45, walked into the Stone's Promise office, and found Dot's coffee already made. "You knew I was coming," he said. "Dex texted me." He shouldn't. He was worried you'd come in at 7 and stand in an empty office and feel sorry for yourself. He was trying to prevent it. Ray looked at the coffee. "It's the regular pot," she said. "Dr. Fielding said 1 cup in the morning was acceptable." "It is, then sit down and drink it. We have 11 new cases to go through." He sat down, drank it. They went through 11 new cases. Everything was exactly as it should be. On the afternoon of the opening, after the ribbon and the photographs and the speeches that Ray kept shorter than anyone expected by simply stopping when he'd said what he meant to say, Dot walked through Margaret House and thought about the day she'd walked into Millhaven Diner with 7 motorcycles in the parking lot and the specific terror of not knowing what she was walking into. She found Mrs. Potowski in the food bank room. Elena Potowski was 82, lived 3 streets over in a house she'd occupied for 40 years, and had been cutting her heart medication in half for 4 months by the time Dot found her. Not because she didn't understand the consequences, but because the consequences of not eating were more immediate and she was working with a fixed calculation. She had a daughter in Phoenix who sent money when she could, and called every Sunday, and didn't know about the medication, because Elena Potowski had spent 42 years not wanting to be a burden and had become very skilled at it. Dot had knocked on her door on a Wednesday morning in November, 5 days into her new job, because Mrs. Potowski's name had appeared on 3 separate intake forms from the Community Health Network over the past year, with no follow-through. They had sat in Mrs. Petowski's living room for 2 hours. The medication situation had been resolved within the week through Stone's Promises Pharmaceutical Assistance Program. The daughter in Phoenix had been called, not by Dot, but by Elena herself, on a Thursday evening, which Elena had reported to Dot afterward with the particular combination of exhaustion and relief that came from having done a hard thing, and found that the hard thing was survivable. At the opening, Elena Petowski was standing behind one of the food bank tables with an apron on, handing out bags with the efficiency of a woman who had been feeding people her whole life and saw no reason to stop. She saw Dot across the room, raised a hand. Dot raised one back. In the back corner of the room, Dot watched Ruthie demonstrating to a group of volunteers how to properly pack a bag for a family with young children. The specific order of things that prevented the bread from being crushed, the way you distributed weight so nobody's arms gave out on the walk home. She had the clipboard Dot recognized from the Wednesday card games, now repurposed with volunteer schedules and inventory lists. She was entirely in her element. She hadn't come back to it in one day. She'd come back to it over weeks, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence, the way you moved back into a space you'd been away from long enough that you had to remember you knew how to be there. The cooking class had started in January. 3 students the first week, 11 by March. There were a waiting list now, which Ruthie managed with a focus that suggested she'd been waiting for something worth organizing for quite some time. Dex was near the entrance talking to Marcus Webb. Marcus was 32. He'd been living in his truck when Dot found him in the parking lot of the food pantry on Oak Street on her second week of outreach. Not asking for help, just sitting in his vehicle looking at the door of the pantry with the expression of someone who had been told no often enough that going to the door had started to feel like a formality before the no arrived. She'd sat in her car next to his truck for 15 minutes before she got out and knocked on his window. "I'm not looking for," he'd started. "I know," she'd said. "Can I ask you your name?" He'd looked at her for a long moment. "Marcus," he'd said. "My name is Dot. Can I buy you a cup of coffee?" He'd said yes. 4 months later, he was leading the job training program's construction skills module, having discovered, through a Stone's Promise partnership with a local contractor that Dot had spent 3 weeks arranging, that he had a talent for it that nobody had previously given him the context to find. He was renting a room in a house on the east side. He had a bank account. He had a plan. He was talking to Dex with the ease of 2 people who'd found their footing in the same place. Ray came to stand beside her. He was moving well, better than well. The surgery had done what it was supposed to do, and 6 months of actually following medical advice had produced a version of him that had more color, more energy, more of whatever the opposite of going through the motions was. He still had opinions about everything. He still had the specific stubbornness that made Dex mutter under his breath approximately twice a day. But there was a quality to him now that hadn't been there in October, something that was less like a man doing the work and more like a man who remembered why the work mattered. "Good turnout," he said. "It's a good building." Briggs gave the best speech. He gave the only speech that didn't go over 5 minutes, which made it the best speech. It did, yes. They stood together and watched the room, people talking to people. Neighbors who had stood on opposite sides of a street in October now standing on the same side of a room in April, exchanging phone numbers, signing up for volunteer shifts, learning each other's names. Margaret would have had something to say about this, Ray said. Not sadly. More like he was reporting something factual. What would she have said? He thought about it. She'd have said, "Took you long enough." And then she'd have made everyone sit down and eat something because in her experience nothing important got done on an empty stomach. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She was someone everyone liked. He paused. She was also someone who would have told you, about 4 months ago, to call your son. In exactly those words without preamble, Dot looked at him. Dex mentioned the December visit, he said. Of course he did. He was pleased. He expressed it by being slightly less anxious than usual for about a week. Caleb and I had dinner twice while he was here, she said, and breakfast every morning, and we went and put flowers on Walter's grave, which neither of us had suggested and both of us needed. She paused. We haven't fixed 4 years in a week. We haven't had every conversation, but we're having them. He called me last Sunday. He's going to call next Sunday. It's a beginning, still, but it's a longer beginning than it was. Ray nodded. the way he nodded when something had landed where it was supposed to land. "She'd have liked you," he said. "Margaret, I think she'd have found you extremely satisfying to know. Is that a compliment?" She used that word specifically about people who didn't waste her time. He looked at the room. "It's the highest one I know how to give." She looked at the photograph on the wall of her office, visible through the open door from where they stood. Margaret laughing in the afternoon light. "I wrote her a letter," said. Ray turned to look at her in November. "After the surgery, when you were in Cleveland, I wanted to." She stopped, thought about how to say it. "I wanted to tell her that someone was there. That night, that he wasn't alone." She paused. "I put it in the photo box with Walter." He was quiet for a moment. "You kept it," he said. "It wasn't the kind of letter you send anywhere. It was the kind you write because writing it is the point." She looked at the room, at Marcus and Dex and Ruthie with her clipboard and Mrs. Petowski with her apron, at Pastor Briggs talking to Mr. Torres, at the people who had been strangers in October standing in a room that had become, in 6 months, a place. "I told her what came after. I thought she deserved to know." Ray looked at his hands, then at the room, then at the photograph visible through the door. "Thank you," he said. "I told her you said hello." He made a sound that was quiet and brief and contained more than most longer sounds she'd heard. That evening, after the last person had gone, and the lights in the main rooms had been turned down and Dex had done the last security check with the thoroughness of someone who checked things twice and called it once, Dot sat in her office. The room was dim. The east-facing window was dark now, the April evening having moved all the way in. The desk lamp made a warm circle. The photograph on the wall caught some of it. Margaret's face in the low light, still laughing, still entirely present in that frozen afternoon. She took out a piece of paper. She'd been writing to Margaret since November, not often, not on a schedule. Only when something happened that she thought warranted reporting. She wrote, "Dear Margaret, 6 months today since the ribbon," which Ray cut, about a 1/4 inch from the correct spot because he refused to mark it beforehand. "And I chose not to say anything because some battles are not the right battles. 93 people came through the doors today. We served 47 families through the food bank. The after-school enrollment is full and has a waiting list. Ruthie is managing the volunteer schedule with an intensity that I think has been looking for a home for 30 years and has finally found one." She paused. "Marcus Webb finished his first construction project today, a bookshelf as part of the training module. He gave it to the after-school room. He looked at it for a long time before he let go of it. That's the look I've learned. That's the one you're working toward." She stopped writing for a moment. The building was quiet now. Outside, Millhaven was doing what it always did at this hour, settling, dimming, becoming the nighttime version of itself. "Caleb is coming for Easter," she wrote. Walter would have been so happy about that. He was not a man who held on to things longer than necessary, Walter. He would have called Caleb on day 3 of the silence and arranged it all and told me about it afterward, and we'd have had the argument about whether that was appropriate. And then we'd have had Easter dinner with our son, and that would have been the end of the argument. She looked at the photograph. "You were married 26 years, you know what I mean." She folded the letter. She didn't put a stamp on it. She never did. She put it in the small wooden box she kept in the desk drawer, the box that held all the letters, November through now, small pages folded into thirds with dates in the corner. Someday she might give them to Ray, or she might not. That wasn't a decision she needed to make tonight. She turned off the desk lamp, stood up, walked through the dark hallway to the front door of Margaret House, her hand trailing the wall the way you navigated familiar darkness, with the confidence of someone who knew where the 3rd floorboard creaked and where the light switch was and where the door opened outward instead of in. She stepped outside, April evening, cold still, but the different cold, the cold with something underneath it, the cold that knew it was losing. Millhaven was lit in its quiet way, the particular arrangement of porch lights and street lamps that she'd learned over 26 years of living here until it was just the way night looked. She stood on the steps of Margaret House for a moment, and then she noticed the young man sitting on the low wall at the edge of the parking lot. Maybe 28, jacket not quite right for the weather, a backpack that had been lived in. He was looking at his phone, or not looking at it, holding it the way people held things when they weren't sure who to call and weren't sure calling would help. She stood on the steps. She thought about a gas station parking lot, About the sound a person made when they were trying not to need help in front of strangers. About what it felt like to be the person who stopped. She walked down. "Hey," she said. He looked up. Defensive first, the way people looked when they'd been surprised into being seen. Then just tired, underneath the defensive, the specific tiredness of someone who'd been carrying something by themselves for too long. "You okay?" she said. "I'm fine, okay." She stood there, not leaving. "It's getting cold." He looked at the building behind her. "What is this place?" "Margaret House. We opened today." She put her hands in her coat pockets. "We have resources. Warm coffee inside, which I should warn you is better than the sign might suggest. And people who know how to connect people with what they need, which is different from people who want to tell you what you should need." She paused. "If you want to come in, we can figure out what we've got." He was quiet for a moment. "Why are you?" "Because you're sitting on a wall at 8 o'clock at night in April, and your jacket isn't warm enough, and you're holding your phone like you're not sure who to call." She shrugged slightly. "And because someone did something similar for me once. Made it simple. Just asked if I needed help." He looked at her. "My name is Dot," she said. "A moment," he said. "Theo." She held the door. "Come in." He came in. She followed. The door closed behind them. Inside, the lights were low and the building smelled like the coffee that had been running all day, and the new paint that hadn't quite finished announcing itself, and the particular smell of a place that had been used hard and well on its first full day. Dot turned the lights up in her office, pulled out the second chair. "Sit," she said. "Tell me what you need." He sat. Outside, Millhaven settled into its April night. The maple tree in Dot's backyard, 4 blocks away, stood in the dark with its first small leaves. Barely there, tentative, the green that came back every year after the orange let go. Not everything that was gone came back, but some things did. And for the ones that didn't, there was this, the work of showing up, the practice of seeing people, the discipline of choosing, again and again, in parking lots and clinic offices and spare rooms with good light, to be the person who stopped. $8. That was what it had cost, and what it had built was still being built. Still being built.